All right, I see people are joining us. I see that the room is filling up. Always good to have you guys. Always good to connect. We have an important conversation ahead of us today. I want to make sure that we have enough people entering the room. All right, more people are entering. This is good. Good to see. I appreciate everybody being timely, especially on such short notice, considering that I just put out this webinar invitation 4 days ago. I'm not sure how long ago it was. It was short notice, so it's good turnaround time. Really great to connect with everybody. Okay, and without further ado, let us dive in. We're going to talk today about Trump 2.0. And I know that there's a lot of hype around it. I also know there's a lot of concern around it. And we're going to try to address that as level-headed as possible. First, before I dive into the material, first, let me just remind everybody that these webinars, they do not happen in a vacuum. They happen because I have people that are supporting me. Those are my clients. Those are my members. If anybody here knows one of my clients, one of my members, give them a hug and thank them. If you would also like to become one of my clients, one of my members, you could request a consultation with me. I'm actually going to push something into the sidebar. So if you guys can see, I just published a link in the sidebar. You'll see a picture of me with a button below it. And if you click on that link, it'll take you to a page where you could request a one-on-one consultation with me so we could talk about what's happening in your world of federal employment and federal benefits and federal retirement. Okay, without further ado, let us dive in to today's material. There's a lot to cover. And I mean, just yesterday was a very, very busy day with Trump signing dozens, maybe even 100 or so executive orders. And there's a lot of stuff coming down the pike, and I'll try to process it as best as I can. But I'll share with you what I've gotten thus far. Today, I'm planning covering these 4 bullet points. So as you guys can see, there's the economic policies that Trump is putting into effect, or is trying to put into effect. There's federal employment, there's federal benefits, there's early retirement. We're going to talk about all those, especially with a focus on federal employment, federal benefits, and early retirement. However, let me just be very, very clear about something. Do not panic sell. That is possibly the worst thing you could do. I already am speaking to people, and they're thinking that the sky is falling, and they're worried about their TSB, and they're moving entirely into G Fund. Can I please remind you, we've seen a Trump presidency before, and we understand that his policies, even though they may not benefit federal employees, but that does not mean that they have no benefit to any other business. There are going to be other businesses that do benefit from this. And it could even be that the economy as an entirety overall has a positive upside as opposed to a negative side. There's a lot of economic policies which I would actually say are not necessarily detrimental to the American economy. They may even help the American economy. So let me share with you guys just some of the policies that are coming down the pike. But I really want to impress everybody that to panic sell might be doing more damage than good to your portfolio. So really, really think long and hard before you decide to move everything to the G Fund, which, by the way, I'll give you anecdotally. I know some people, they moved everything to the G Fund when Trump became president the first time, and they've been in the G Fund ever since. And obviously, they've missed out on an economic boom. I do not want that happening to anybody in this room. So if anybody here is really, really on the fence, they're not sure what to do to invest with their investments, that's one of the reasons why I mentioned that I'm happy to talk with you guys on the side, one-on-one. Send me the connection request. I do not want you doing anything drastic that's going to cost you dearly. With that being said, I think that Trump's policies that are coming down the pike, there are some of them that are concerning. And is there, can I say that there's a negative impact on some of them? Yes, there are. I wouldn't be surprised if there's going to be some negative impact. But for the most part, these policies over here that I have outlined over here, they are pretty much going to translate into a positive impact. Can I guarantee it? No. Will you see the stock market go up tomorrow? Can't say when it's going to go up. A lot of economic changes, they usually take some time to go into the system and reverberate and show their benefits. So it's not necessarily that you're going to see overnight responses, but nonetheless, I think overall, some of these policies are very, very strong for the economy. So just name a few. Lower taxes. Lower taxes. I'm sure you guys know that the Trump tax cuts, the tax brackets that you're experiencing right now, those tax brackets are scheduled to expire at the end of this year, unless Trump extends those tax cuts. Now, for those who don't remember, if the Trump tax cuts expire, you will see your tax brackets go up. Let me translate what this means. Right now, the 22 bracket, if the Trump tax cuts expires, the 22 bracket is going to go back to the 25 bracket. That's a 3% increase. The 24 bracket, which many of you are located in, the 24 bracket, that's going to increase to the 28 bracket. So that's a 4% increase. So if the Trump tax cuts expire, everybody's taxes are going to be going up. So Trump extending his tax cuts should actually be a benefit to pretty much every person in this room right here. I know I've heard people say that the Trump tax cuts, they only benefit the rich. I don't understand how you could say that it only benefits the rich when if you're in the 22 bracket, 24 bracket, that's not necessarily the wealthiest people in America, and that's going to benefit them. Instead of being taxed at 28 or 25, they're only going to be taxed at 24, 22. That's a benefit. That's mathematic. So I'm not sure why people say these Trump tax cuts only benefit the rich. I think that might just be a talking point for them, but that's not exactly accurate. Also, energy independence. I'm sure you guys realize that America is right now dependent on foreign energy to some degree. Obviously, not completely, but to some degree. And as a result of that, whenever there's disruptions in the supply line, it's going to cause problems with the American with the cost of energy in America. And also by Trump creating energy independence, that means it's going to be energy production is going to be brought back to the States. There's going to be new jobs introduced. We're going to be able to at least shelter ourselves. If there's any disruptions overseas, we'll have a little bit of a stability in our energy prices. We can even create our energy and sell it. We can export energy. And if you export energy, that makes money for the United States of America. So that is, in general, a good policy. Now, people say that it's going to, pollute the environment. What about climate change and all that? And you know what? I will remind you that America is not really the top emitter of carbon or whatever the energy issues are. Let me just point, that there's other countries out there that are certainly responsible for them. And I would even point out that whenever there are problems, there's usually innovation to improve things. And innovation is a very, very good thing. And that brings us to the next bullet point, which is deregulation. Deregulation is there are many policies that are hamstringing business. And if you could just remove those policies, businesses will get more creative. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Stefan, but regulation makes the trade environment safer. Deregulation makes it less safe. And I understand why you're saying that. Deregulation makes it less safe. But let me just remind you of something. That even when the government is not regulating, that does not mean that commercial entities are not regulating. Just think about all the ratings companies out there, Moody's, S&P, and you guys work for the federal government. I'm sure you remember there's a company called Dun & Bradstreet, and they also gave like an assessment, a grade, a score to different companies, and the federal government was reliant on the scores of these rating agencies. So even the government is relying on non-government entities to rate things and to score things. So those independent entities, that creates some form of regulation to some degree, because everyone wants to see that the policies are done correctly and businesses are being treated fairly and the products are safe. So all that is, you have these consumer reports, you have all these very similar agencies and companies that their job is to make sure that things are being kept in place, not necessarily the job of the government. Now, some laws may be in effect, and again, that all is going to vary depending upon which laws. DOGE. So we know that the government is looking to trim its spending. Obviously, if the government trims expenses, so that's good. That'll hopefully slow down the national deficit. I don't know if you guys realize this, but we have a national deficit that is what, $36 trillion these days? 36 trillion. So if there's anything we could do to slow that down, I think that'll be just benefit the value of the American dollar. I'll put it in perspective. I'm sure you guys have heard of the Postal Service. Now, while we love the Postal Service, we do know that the United States Postal Office is running an annual deficit that is somewhere between $5 billion and $10 billion. So if we could somehow figure out how to stop losing the $5 or $10 billion, I think we're all game for that. I know that The Pentagon, they just said, failed its seventh audit in a row. The Pentagon has a budget of like $850 billion, and they can't balance their budget. They don't know where this money is going to. So transparency and understanding where the money is going to may prevent the government from having to borrow even more money, which is just going to further devalue the American dollar. Also, selling federal loan for housing. I'm sure you guys have heard about this, that there's a housing shortage. And the reason why, that's why housing prices are so high, because of the shortage of housing. So one of the things we could do is if we could make land available for development. Again, this is not going to be the government developing it, but the government is going to be selling land, making it available for developers. So that means that the success is not on the government, it's on the developing companies. They have to make sure that they do their due diligence and see whether it's worth their investment. And obviously, if they're purchasing land, that does a couple of things. Number one, it's gonna selling the land gives government gives money to the government. The government has just sold the land, so now they're making some money off the land that they're selling. So that's obviously good for the government. But also, when you have more housing, you have some tax benefits or tax revenue, that flows into the cities or the states, and so that takes a little bit of pressure off the federal government to having to support these cities and states when they have additional tax revenue. So overall, I think that's a good benefit as well. And then there's tariffs. I know that tariffs is probably the most controversial one, because tariffs clearly drives up the cost of goods. It definitely does. There's no doubt about it, because whatever tariff is imposed is going to be passed along to the consumers 100%. However, let me just point out something, that you guys work for the federal government. I'm sure you know that the government, being the major purchaser that it is, it has leverage. Because it's such a major purchaser, it could negotiate for the best rates, the fairest practices. Well, guess what? The federal government is also a major purchaser from other countries. There are some other countries that rely heavily on American business. And because the American government is a major purchaser from other countries, the American government could throw around its weight and negotiate the best prices, just like the federal government does with regular contractors like me. They negotiate their best prices. So this is not even something that's exclusive for exports or imports, rather, but rather this is even internally. So all these policies, can you argue that there's a negative effect to each of these policies? Like we said, energy independence that might be problematic for climate change. You can make that argument, and again, I think you could make a counter argument. Deregulation, things are going to be less safe. Again, you can make a counter argument. The government cutting spending is not really going to help. I don't see why it wouldn't help. The federal landing for housing, again, you could say that that's not a good deal, because we're going to create houses. It's going to be unsightly. We're going to lose beautiful land. Instead, we're going to have unsightly production. It's not necessarily going to be unsightly. It really depends on who's developing it. And again, tariffs, I understand that the price will go up, but that gives the government some leverage. That gives the ability for them to leverage the best results, the best trade practices. So are they all controversial? Yes. Could there be a negative to them? Yes. For the most part, however, I think that these policies are generally positive to overall economic growth. And that's why I tell you guys, do not panic sell your TSB. I don't think that is a smart move. Let it work. I understand that there are some changes coming to federal employment. We're going to talk about that next. But as far as the regulations that are going to be hitting the overall economy, I think in general that these policy changes are going to be an overall benefit, as not an overall detriment. So please do not panic sell. So with that being said, let's now move on to the next topics. We're going to talk about federal employment, federal benefits, retirement benefits. So let's talk about federal employment. Now, I will admit, I don't want to overextend myself and make it seem like I am a professional at employment law or federal employment law. I am not. So any one of these proposals that the Trump team is presenting, I'm assuming they thought it through. But I also know that there's going to be counter arguments. I think I even heard today that there's already a couple of lawsuits going into effect. A lawsuit against DOJ, a lawsuit against this, the return to office, a lawsuit against Schedule F. I'm hearing there's already lawsuits being filed. And as we've seen with the federal government, it's not easy to get anything done with the federal government. So even if you come in and you sign executive orders from day one, that does not necessarily pull the plug on employment. And if it does, it might not be immediate. It might take time for it to be implemented. But let me just point out the following things that President Trump is talking about. Number one is a hiring freeze. I think that was one of the first executive orders, which is that they're no longer hiring new employees. Any positions that have not been filled, they're not allowing those positions to be filled. Again, the details of that, I don't know all the details, but obviously that's going to prevent the increase of the federal government. The more hiring, the more money the government is going to be spending. Let's be very, very clear about that. So this is going to prevent the government from spending more money. Again, whether you say it's a good thing or a bad thing, if the government is spending less money, you know what that means that the government's spending less money? That basically means that somebody, instead of the government giving employment to people, it has to be a private employer giving employment to people. So a private company may need the services of a person and they'll hire him. You basically saying, who controls how the money is spent? Is the government going to control how the money is spent, or is the individual going to control how the money is spent? So by you taking money away from the government and saying, let's turn it to return it to the citizens. Now the citizens decide who they want to hire, who they want to employ. Do you want to shop at this store? Do you want to shop at that store? I mean, these are obvious benefits. That's like almost basics of economics, but that's really beyond me. Returning to office. I will tell you that I've heard federal employees nervous about having to return to the office. Let me just say something to you guys. Return to the office, there's a difference between remote work and telework. If you guys read the language of the executive action, you'll see that Trump wants to put an end to remote work, but remote work is not necessarily the same thing as telework. Remote work basically means that you have your primary office location somewhere other than the federal building. That's remote work. Telework is your primary office location is inside the federal building. However, you have the ability to work from your house, but that's not necessarily that you've changed the location of your primary office. Your primary office is still the building that your federal agency is located in. So I think that the language over here, there might be some wiggle room in the language to say that federal employees that are working remotely, they may have an issue, but the ones that are working, that are teleworking, they may not have to return to office. But again, this is all speculation. We have to see how it's going to come out. Schedule F employees, people are nervous that it's going to make federal employees easier to hire, easier to fire. And I think the answer to that is it might, but I don't know if that applies to every single federal employee. I think the language of these executive orders that are targeting federal employees are the ones that are involved in policymaking. And to my knowledge, the ones that are involved in policymaking, out of the close to 2 million federal employees that there are, I'm not even sure how many federal employees. I think there's close to 2 million federal employees that there are. Of the 2 million, I think that impacts about somewhere between 60,000 and 70,000 federal employees. And again, that's a lot of people. I'm not saying that's not a lot of people, but I am saying that in the grand scheme of things, that is about 1 or 2% of federal employees. So that means out of every 100 federal employees, maybe 2% will be impacted by that. The other 98 will probably not be impacted by that. So that's good to know. Also, a reduction in force, a RIF, a reduction in force. The agencies may have to shed their employees. And if they shed their employees, we're going to talk about that very soon. Does that mean that federal employees are able to retire? If there's a reduction in force, can federal employees retire? We're going to talk about it in just a minute. Let me get there in just a moment. Before I talk about retirement, let me talk about some of the federal benefits that people are scared Trump is going to touch. So first, the TSB. I will tell you, I haven't seen any indication that Trump is going to touch the TSB at all. Okay. And when it comes to the TSB, as I mentioned before, please do not panic sell. I would not encourage you to panic sell. It's not a good idea to make these decisions in a panic. And as I mentioned, the policies that he's promoting in general are going to be a benefit to the economy, not a detriment to the economy. It's a wait and see, but in general, economically, they're usually going to be a benefit, not a detriment. So please, the TSB, I don't think there's really much concern over there, and I would tell you guys to not panic sell. Next, FEHB. Once again, I haven't heard any policy specifically targeting FEHB. So the one thing that I have come across in the past about FEHB is that they may require federal employees to get Medicare when they turn age 65. And by the way, we have a precedent for that. President Biden in 2022, I want to say. In 2022, if I look at my notes, I'm pretty sure there was a Postal Employee Health Insurance Act. I forget exactly the name of the act, but in 2022, the Postal Employee Act forced postal employees to have to get Medicare when they turned age 65. So this is not a President Trump thing. This is actually something that was done even by President Biden. So I know it's a little bit of a surprise to hear that, but that's nonetheless the case. And if they force you to have to get Medicare, so that is going to basically give you a decision. Your decision is going to be, okay, do I now have Medicare with my FEHB, or do I have my Medicare alone and forget about FEHB? I will give you guys some good news. Even if they force retirees to have Medicare with FEHB, even if they force that, the precedent that we saw from the postal employees was that the postal employees were not penalized for getting Medicare late. That is amazing, amazing news. Meaning, if we're following the precedent, you might think that if they force federal employees to get Medicare, the ones that were late to Medicare, that means the ones that got it at the age of, beyond the age of 65, let's say 66, 67, whatever it may be, you might think that those late enrollees were going to be penalized. However, the precedent was that those late employees were not penalized. So that's what happened to the postal employees. And there's a very strong argument that that precedent was set, and that the same thing will happen to the federal employees. That even if they force you to have Medicare, which I admit, Medicare is not as wonderful as FEHB. Medicare is going to be more expensive for many people than FEHB. So that's really not a good thing if they force you to have Medicare. But my point is two things. Number one, this is not just a Trump thing. This happened even in the Biden days. And then number two, the precedent was that even if they forced you to have Medicare with your FEHB, you might not be penalized for late enrollment in Medicare. Okay, so they keep that in mind. Okay, next, pay freeze. We've had pay freeze in the past where every year federal employees, we anticipate, we enjoy an increase. I think this year in 2025, federal employees saw, if I want to say, not 100%, but I think it was about a 1.5% increase to their pay. So federal employees got that pay increase this year. And for the past few years, federal employees have been getting pay increase. There's talk about a pay freeze. Now, this is not one of the executive orders. To my knowledge, it wasn't. And this is all speculation. I have not heard a Trump policy that is saying that there's going to be a pay freeze. But again, it could be that I just didn't hear everything. There's a lot of news coming out, and I may not have heard everything. But even if there is a pay freeze, yes, what that means is that you may not have an inflation adjustment to your salary, which obviously stinks. That obviously, I'm not going to sugarcoat that. That would obviously stink if there was a pay freeze. Retirement benefits, I have not heard of them scaling back retirement benefits. Like, for example, your FERS pension, your CSRS pension, I have not heard of any reductions to your retirement benefits at all. The one area of retirement benefits that may be reduced is the COLAs. So in the attempt to trim government expenses, one of the things they do is the types of government benefits that just go on forever and ever and ever, which is basically your federal pensions. Once you retire, you get a pension forever. And those pensions, they come with a COLA, cost of living adjustment. It's an inflation adjustment. And the inflation adjustment is a very expensive benefit for the government. So I could hear, even though I have not heard any specific policies targeting the COLA, but I can hear that if the government wants to trim back retirement benefits, they may start with the COLAs. I've heard that in the past. I have not heard any Trump policies to that, but I've heard in the past that if the government wants to scale back on retirement benefits, they may scale back on the COLAs. Now, FERS employees, right now, you guys get a diet COLA. You don't even get a full COLA. You get a diet COLA. They may reduce that even further. Oh, and by the way, you know who else may have to reduce their COLAs? Social Security, but that is a different conversation. We're not going to get into Social Security because Social Security is not just focused on federal employees, that it will impact the entire United States of America. I'm sure you guys have heard that Social Security is the third rail of politics. Most politicians do not like touching Social Security at all. So I would not be surprised if Trump, again, does not touch Social Security. His first term, he didn't touch Social Security. And in this term, there's a very strong argument to say it's the third rail of politics. Nobody likes doing that. So they may not touch Social Security as well. So of the federal benefits that you guys are enjoying right now, I think the pay freeze is one that I can't say that that's for sure going to happen. But if it does, that would probably be a tremendous negative impact because that means you're not going to keep up with inflation. FEHB and Medicare, that may happen, may not happen, but even if it did, it would not be a Trump precedent. That would be something that was already preceded him by previous administrations. Okay, now let's get to what I think is driving most people to attend this class. They're concerned that the work environment is going to be uncomfortable. There's going to be, first of all, a return to office. You might have to return to office, as we said earlier. And there's just an overall sentiment that federal employees are not welcome, they're not appreciated. Now, I will tell you something. I don't know where we're getting that federal employees are not welcome, not appreciated. That is not something that I've heard the administration say. But I'm not going to try to defend the administration. Their job is to defend themselves. My job is to really just try to inform you guys that if the federal work environment becomes uncomfortable, so people are going to be tempted to leave. Now, leaving and retiring, those are not the same things. I want to go through what your options are. So first of all, let me just point out that there's a few terms I want you guys to be familiar with. The first term is quitting. Quitting basically means that you separate without being eligible for an immediate retirement. And by the way, included in quitting is declining a reasonable offer. So the government could actually come to you and they could make changes to your work. They could even make changes to your pay. So for example, they could say that we're going to keep your base pay the same. That they can't change. That's not a reasonable offer. They have to keep the base pay the same. But they could change anything beyond the base pay. So if anybody here has additional types of pay, so whether it's a locality pay or whether it is some additional benefits beyond the base pay, the government could come back to you and say, listen, we're not changing your base salary, but we are changing anything beyond the base salary. That could be reduced. And if they offer that to you and you decline that offer, well, so long as it's satisfied what's considered a legally reasonable offer, if you decline that, that's considered quitting. You're not going to be eligible for your, if you're not eligible for an immediate retirement and you just decide to quit, so you're not going to be able to get a pension right away. You're not going to be able to continue FEHB benefits. So quitting basically means you separate without being eligible for an immediate retirement. There is also something called a reduction in force, a RIF. A reduction in force is basically when the government starts shedding employees. And if there is a reduction in force, also, that does not entitle you to an immediate retirement. The one thing that could get you an immediate retirement is something called VERA. So federal employees, you need to keep your ears open. Will your agency offer VERA? Now, VERA stands for Voluntary Early Retirement Authority. And guess what? Whether your agency offers VERA or not is actually not up to your agency. Your agency has to request permission from OPM in order to offer VERA to their employees. So let's say your agency has a reduction in force. Your agency, by seeing they have a reduction in force, they may reach out to OPM and say, listen, we're going to have a reduction in force. We're having a lot of people that are going to be dismissed. Can we offer an early retirement to these people? That is a request that your agency has to make to OPM. OPM could grant that request to your agency. They may or may not. The assumption is that they will. And if they grant that request to your agency, that means your agency can now offer early retirement authority to the employees. If you want to be able to retire with an early retirement authority, so you have to have, if you look at the slide over here, you have to be at least age 50 with 20 years of service or any age with 25 years of service. So I want everybody in this room to think to themselves, first of all, how many years of service do you have? Do you have 20 years of service? If you have 20 years of service, you could retire so long as you're age 50, okay? Or do you have 25 years of service? If you have 25 years of service, you could retire at any age, Okay, so some of you already have the 20 years or the 25 years. However, those who have less than 20 years of service, you're not going to be eligible for the early retirement authority. If there is a reduction in force and you don't meet these eligibility requirements, so then you might not be able to claim an immediate retirement pension. If you don't claim an immediate retirement pension, that is similar to quitting in a sense, in that you're not going to get a pension right away and you're not going to be able to continue your FEHB. However, if you have the 20 years and age 50 or 25 years and any age, you could collect an immediate pension with no reduction, an immediate pension. You're going to be able to continue your FEHB, and you will even get the first supplement when you reach MRA. For most people, MRA is going to be 57, some use 56, okay? But anybody here who is offered VERA and you have the age service requirements, you could retire, full pension, you'll have the FEHB, and you will eventually get the first supplement when you turn MRA. Also, the government, in addition to offering an early retirement authority, they may offer VSIP. VSIP stands for Voluntary Separation Incentive Pay. It's basically a buyout. So VERA is the early outs and VSIP is the buyouts. And the separation incentive pay for most employees is going to be about $25,000. At least that's the way it was. I have heard murmurs, I have heard rumors that they may even give you an additional severance pay. I have heard such things, but I don't know if the severance pay is going to be offered to those that are eligible to VERA. I have heard that the severance pay may be offered to the people that are not eligible for VERA. And again, these are things that are a little bit unclear to me as to how things are going to shake out. But VSIP and severance pay are not the same thing. Okay, VSIP is a buyout. They're going to pay you $25,000. If you work for the Department of Defense, it's probably going to be $40,000. And there are strings attached to that buyout. The strings are that you're not allowed to return to federal employment within a 5-year period. Or let me say it differently. You're allowed to return to federal employment, but if you return to federal employment within a 5-year period of receiving that buyout, you're going to have to pay back that buyout. So anybody here who receives a buyout, if you return to federal employment within 5 years, be prepared. You're going to have to pay back that $25,000 that they paid you. Okay, so be very, very prepared for that. But I want to be very, very clear with everybody that the government, if there is a reduction in force, that does not automatically entitle you to early retirement authority. And if you're not going to be eligible for early retirement authority, that means you're not going to be eligible for a pension right away. So if the government has a reduction in force and you're not going to get a pension, that is a major blow to your income. And I would encourage you guys to explore alternative options. I mean, if the government, I'm not saying this is going to happen. I don't want to be a fear mongerer. And I know that the media will love me to be a fear mongerer. But we've seen a Trump administration before. There have always been threats to federal employment in the past. Yes, some of those threats have materialized, but it's a very small percentage of federal employees that it impacted. And again, I mentioned before, maybe 1%, maybe 2% of federal employees. Okay. So I really don't want to be a fear monger, but I will say that if you feel uncomfortable in the current environment, you should probably run your numbers and test and see whether you could separate from federal employment. This is what I do for my clients. If my client says, Stefan, and by the way, you should know, I think in the past 3 weeks, I've run 5 of these early retirements. Okay, so 5 early retirements examples that I had to run where the client said, Stefan, I'm concerned about my job. I'm thinking I may be forced to retire in the year 2025. Can I retire in the year 2025? Some of these clients are going to get a pension from the federal government. Some of these clients are not going to get a pension from the federal government. But I would encourage you guys to run the numbers. So anybody here who has the ability to collect their financial data, I would encourage you to run your numbers. And if you don't know how to run these numbers, that's exactly why people are meeting with me, so that they could have these conversations and run the numbers and see whether or not they could afford to retire. And what my clients want to see is that if they're not able to afford retirement, what salary do they need to get in order to carry them through? Do they need to replace the same exact salary that they have right now? Could they afford a lesser salary? So we run these situations. Also, it's going to be very interesting whether you could rely on your investments. Okay. Usually, in order for you to rely on your investments, you have to separate at the age of 55 from federal service to access your TSB. If you guys separate at the age of 50, unless you're a public safety officer, but let's say if you're not a public safety officer, right? If you separate at the age of 50, you're not going to be able to access your TSB without penalty. So everybody here should really, really think long and hard about this. The current environment for federal employees, I don't want to say it's going to be a disaster. It could be very similar to what we saw with the first Trump administration. You may feel a little bit uncomfortable, but if you like the work that you do, you can continue to do your work, and you'll probably be able to do your work through this administration. But if I'm wrong about this, which I could be wrong, if they start cutting government jobs en masse, you should not be like a deer in the headlights and just watch it happen. You should proactively see, number one, whether you could afford immediate retirement, and number two, if you cannot afford immediate retirement, what income needs do you have? In addition to running your numbers, you may also want to start networking and marketing yourself to other employers. I have some clients that are in their 40s and they're putting out resumes. They're putting out their resumes to private, to what's called, to commercial entities, not to the public sector, to the private sector. So I understand that the private sector doesn't give pensions. They don't give lifetime health insurance. So you're right, some of the benefits of the private sector are not there. But maybe the private sector will give you a job and pay you a similar salary. Sometimes the private sector pays more than the federal sector. So anyhow, what I'm trying to say is that I do not have a future. I don't have a crystal ball. I cannot see what's going to happen to federal employees in the future. I don't know whether you're going to lose your jobs or not lose your jobs. I do know that there is a environment right now where there's a lot of talk about the current administration being anti-federal employees. I think that is a hyperbole. I do not think that is a correct assessment that he's anti-federal employees at all. I do not want to say that at all. But because that has been trumpeted in people's ears, people have been hearing that language that the current administration is anti the federal government, anti-federal employees. People have a little bit of a negative sense of working for the federal government right now. And if you're concerned about your employment with the federal government, definitely run your numbers. Definitely see whether you could afford an immediate retirement. And if you cannot, you should start marketing yourself and seeing what type of employment you can get elsewhere, what type of salary needs do you have. But certainly, let me just remind you guys as well, which is do not panic sell. Whatever moves you do, it should not be with a panic. It should be with a level-headedness as much as possible. So when it comes to your investments, do not panic sell. When it comes to federal employment, don't make any panic decisions. You could start marketing yourself. You could start networking to other employers. You should definitely reach out to your financial advisor and see whether or not you could retire. And anybody here that does not have somebody who can help them with financial planning, that is something that I do with federal employees. And if you're interested in talking with me one-on-one, I would encourage you guys to reach out to me. Do me a favor, click that green button on the right side of the screen, and you could request a one-on-one session with me. Okay. I do want to open the floor to some questions. I see in the chat box there are some questions waiting for me. So let's see those questions. There we go. Okay, another good class. I see Randall's asking, how about splitting my TSP 50-50? So Randall, would you have been 50-50 if Trump was not in office? And if you would not have been 50-50 if Trump was not in office, like for example, when Biden was in office, were you 50-50? So if you were not 50-50 when Biden was in office, I don't think you should move 50-50 right now. Again, I understand that some of these policies are not going to be good for federal employment and federal benefits, but that's very different than the rest of the economy. The federal employees, they may have a little bit of a slowdown. They may have a cut in federal benefits. They may have a reduction in force. However, the rest of the American economy may not have those things. In fact, they may have a boon. So I don't think a 50-50 move, if you were not a 50-50 investor already, I don't think that is the right thing for you to do. Fine. Randall, yes, we could be exporting much more. And also we are trying to decrease our energy projections. I mean, that's been going on for a while. We're trying to decrease energy projections. I'm sure you realize that the cost of energy, not just in the form of gasoline for your car, but also your energy bills. I'm sure you realize that those things have gone up. The reason why they've gone up is because of the supply in the United States of America. So even though we are producing, we're not producing like we used to, and that impacts prices. Okay, let's go a little bit further. Judy's talking about Medicare A and B. Yes, I'm talking about Medicare A and B. They may be forcing you to have Medicare A and B. I see Harlan is asking, how is the pension calculated if taking Vera? So Harlan, it's the same calculation. If you're a first employee, same calculation. So it's 1% per year, right? And 1% per year times the amount of years of service times your high 3 average salary. So it's really going to be the same calculation. But the issue is, Harlan, obviously, if you're retiring sooner, that means you'll have less years of service. If you were planning on retiring in 5 years from now, 5 years from now, you'll have 5 more years of service. And if you retire right now, you'll have 5 less years of service. I see Jacqueline's asking, if you take Vera with 25 years of service, but don't meet MRA. So if you have 25 years of service, you will get your pension. And the COLAs for federal employees do not kick in until the age of 62. Okay, they don't kick in until the age of 62. Now, if you are a public safety employee, so for example, if you're a law enforcement or if you're a firefighter, you will get the COLAs. But if you're not, so then the COLAs do not kick in until the age of 62. Michelle is asking, cannot keep FEHB with quitting or RIF, but can with VERA, VSIP, MRA, correct? So, Michelle, you do not have to be MRA in order to have VERA. You could be below MRA, and if you have a VERA, you will be able to continue your FEHB. That is correct. I don't know the question, Bill. What have you heard about the supplemental surviving? You mean the first supplement? I have not heard any cuts to the first supplement. So, and again, just because I haven't heard it does not mean that I know it all. Okay, so it could be there are things I just not have heard. I have just not yet heard. W. Brown, I would like to schedule consultation. Fantastic. Lisa, with VERA, if you're not at your MRA, is it still in reduced, or is there any early retirement reduction? So VERA, Lisa, even if you're not an MRA, there is no reduction. Okay, if you're a CSRS employee, there might be a reduction, but if you are a first employee, there's no reduction. Jesse is asking, Medicare requirements, would that apply if you are already retired? Jesse, it did apply to the postal employees. So if we're following that precedent, yes, it would apply as well. Okay, fantastic, amazing. I want to tell you guys that I don't think you guys should be walking around with like a bag over your face and feel like this is terrible, this is awful, the sky is falling. Again, I do feel that there's going to be a shrinking of the federal government, but from the little data that I'm seeing, it might impact 1 to 2% of federal employees. Now that's, again, nobody wants to be of that 1 or 2%, but 98% are really not going to be impacted by a reduction in force. And I think you maybe have to worry about more the pay freeze. You might not have inflation adjustments next year or the year going forward. But again, that wasn't even part of the executive orders yet. So that might not even happen. So again, I would not walk around with a bag over your faces thinking that this is terrible, this is awful, the sky is falling, they're anti-federal employees, they just want to, they don't care for us. That is not the sentiment at all. I do think that everybody here should really continue doing their public service. You guys became federal employees. The sentiment that I hear from many federal employees is that they didn't sign up for the job for the money. They signed up to be public servants. And if you guys enjoy the work that you do as public servants, I would just say continue doing your job, continue doing it, enjoy the work that you do, and do not panic sell, do not make any panic moves. But let's also be realistic. If you're going to be in that 1%, 2% of federal employees that are going to possibly lose their jobs, you don't have to sit back idly and do nothing. You probably should be proactive. Proactive means, number one, crunch your numbers and see if you could afford an immediate retirement. Number two, if you cannot afford immediate retirement and you need additional income, how much additional income? And then number three, if you need additional income, maybe you should start marketing yourself to a new employer by putting out resumes and requesting meetings. Don't be like a deer in the headlights, just standing still. Be proactive. And I think if you're proactive, both with your employment and also with your TSB, I think that overall you're going to benefit from the next 4 years, whether it be in the form of being a direct federal employee or whether it just be in the form of the overall U.S. economy getting stronger and America on the world stage getting stronger. I think that's something we could all benefit from. And I look forward to sharing with you guys many more classes over the next 4 years. And you'll see that those other classes, they're probably not going to be about Trump. They're going to be about retirement benefits, the TSB, Social Security. So there's going to be a lot more coming down the pike. I appreciate you guys joining me today. And once again, whoever wants to continue this conversation with me, do me a favor, click that button in the side, that green button, request that one-on-one consultation, and you and I will get together and we'll talk about whether you are prepared for the next 4 years of the new Trump administration. Have a great day, everybody. All the best. Thank you for joining me.